Florida tourism officials have pulled a multi-million-dollar ad campaign financed by BP that featured the tagline, "The coast is clear." They have pulled that ad campaign because the coast is no longer clear. Not all of it, anyway. Brown, sticky tar balls washing up on the white sand beaches of Florida's Panhandle. The large oil slick that they've been tracking off of Florida is about 3.5 miles offshore, apparently. But these blobs of oil have found their way to land. Florida has been granted fishery failure determination status by the Commerce Department. It's now the fourth state, along with Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi, to get that designation as a result of the BP oil disaster. In Alabama so far, the oily tar balls have turned up on Dauphin Island and at Fort Morgan. At the Joint Incident Command Center in Mobile, Alabama, officials called up about 1,500 boats to spot and skim the oil. Some other contract workers were out today on Alabama beaches, scooping these globs into plastic bags. The tar balls in Alabama and Florida were the result of a hard choice that had to be made to concentrate the effort to keep the oil off the shore on the marshes instead of on the beaches. It is way more difficult, if not impossible, to clean oil out of wetlands. Once oil hits, plants start to die, and to the extent that the plants hold the wetland soil together, the plants dying in wetlands starts those wetlands disappearing. Relatively speaking, sandy beaches are easier to clean, and so emergency officials concentrated their boom laying in front of the wetlands and not in front of the sand. Over in Mississippi, oil first washed ashore on Tuesday. But the state's governor, Haley Barbour, isn't too bothered about the whole thing. Obama met with governors from the affected states today down here in Louisiana, but Governor Barbour was a no-show. He was up in New York meeting with bond rating agencies and attending the annual Mississippi Picnic in Central Park. Haley Barbour also skipped out on meeting with the president when he was here last week. Governor Barbour told reporters this week that the oil, the gooey, emulsified cake batter texture oil that's coming ashore, he said, quote, "It's not poisonous." He said the only risk is, quote, "if a small animal got coated enough with it, it could smother it." Governor Barbour seems like a very nice man. He has had a very accomplished career in politics. He once was personally very cordial to me when I was on the same episode of Meet the Press with him, and he was very nice to me. In this instance, though, about this thing, this don't worry about the oil, it's not poisonous thing, I guess I will just contribute that anecdotally, I experienced a couple of hours of feeling flat out drunk in a bad way today after not that much time out on the water amid this oil that is headed toward Haley Barbour's home state of Mississippi. Nausea, pretty intense dizziness, the whole 9 yards. It lasted for a couple of hours. Lest you believe I am being a psychosomatic hippie about all of this, always a possibility, consider that poison control centers say that they've received dozens of calls already from people who say they feel sick because of exposure to the oil. President Obama addressed some toxicity concerns at his press conference today.
People who are on site involved in cleanup, they have to be mindful of the fact that we're dealing with toxins here. This could make people very sick if they're not careful. They've got to get the appropriate training. They need the appropriate equipment. If they get sick, we now have health centers that are stationed at each of these points.
We have been trying to explain and understand the impact of this oil disaster on flora and fauna all over the Gulf Coast. It is never a good sign when you have to think about humans this way, but, you know, we're fauna too. Joining us now is Ricky Ott, a community activist and a former commercial salmon fisherman who has a degree in marine toxicology. Ricky's also the author of the book, Not One Drop, Promises, Betrayal, and Courage in the Wake of the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill. Ricky Ott, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's good to have you on the show.
Good evening, Rachel.
So obviously, this is an environmental disaster. It is an economic disaster. Are you worried that it is or it might become a public health disaster as well?
I am down here specifically to try to prevent it from becoming a human health tragedy, which is the next step. What I'm seeing is the build-up to exactly what happened in Alaska.
What did you learn from the Exxon Valdez disaster about the short-term effects of exposure to oil and the long-term health effects? What should people down here consider to be the lessons learned from the Valdez?
Hard hats are not enough on the workers. People need respirators. This is oil spill response is considered a hazardous waste operation. These are incredibly toxic chemicals. The oil in and of itself, the Louisiana crude has a lot higher proportion of light ends, the amount of oil that evaporates into the air and dissolves into the water column. This is incredibly hot stuff for people to be breathing, and it's not just the workers out on the cleanup. In the communities, they're considered bad air days, the days when the air smells like oil, and people are getting the same symptoms as the workers, only to a little bit lesser degree. Headaches, nausea, sore throats, stuffy sinuses. This is all classic hallmark symptoms of overexposure to basically crude oil. Central nervous system problems, respiratory problems.
What are the long-term effects of that kind of exposure? Obviously, the size of the dose of the exposure makes a big difference in terms of how your system copes with it. But people who are experiencing symptoms like that right now, people who are worried about exposure like that, what do they need to think about in terms of long-term risks?
It's actually dose plus host makes the poison. And so what we see offshore, people who have respiratory problems already might be a little bit more sensitive. What people need to think is respirators. Onshore in these communities, they need to be thinking the same thing. If they're going outside on bad air days, we need to be serious here. Respirators, I'm also actually taking myself nutritional supplements for build up my immune system, respiratory system, and sinus.
Let me just get your reaction also briefly to the clip from the president that we just played about the risk to people who are involved closely with the oil. Do you feel like people who are working in the cleanup effort and the people, as you say, who live in areas where oil has come ashore, do you feel like people are getting any of the right information, any of the right protection? Has there been enough communication about these risks, and what do you think the government should be doing?
Definitely not yet. The information has not been communicated yet to the people. People are being told in Louisiana, oh, if it smells bad, go inside, close the windows, turn on the air conditioning. Well, potentially this is going to last all summer. People can't stay inside all summer. People need to understand that these cold and flu-like symptoms that they're getting, they look kind of benign. A headache, a sore throat, maybe that's all it is. Actually, it could be chemical poisoning. This requires specialty doctors who are trained in occupational and environmental medicine. This is not like your regular traditional doctors. And the hospital should be working up a data set of all this, and the hospital should be warning people, if the sore throat persists on days when you smell oil in particular, come on in, let's check you out. Long enough, if people are misdiagnosed, people could wind up like they did Exxon Valdez. I am still dealing with workers who are 100% disabled now. These acute symptoms can manifest into some very nasty systemic type illnesses, immune suppression, chronic respiratory problems, brain fogs and dizziness, and also a whole smattering of organ failures like liver, kidney, even blood disorders. So this is pretty serious stuff.
Rikki Ott, activist, author, and marine toxicologist, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's good to have your insight and your expertise. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Rachel.